Ready to really boost those English skills.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We're going deep today into what it takes to go from, intermediate English to advanced English, all thanks to this popular YouTube language expert. Yeah, so whether you are like prepping for a tough English exam or maybe want to sound more like a native speaker, or honestly, you're just curious about how to get to real fluency, we've got some pretty cool insights for you.
One thing that I find really interesting is just how much time it actually takes to go from intermediate to advanced. You've probably felt it yourself, right? Like it's way harder to get from like a B1 to B2 than those early levels.
For sure. It feels like you hit a wall, even if you're putting in the same amount of effort as before. Why is that?
The research actually shows that it takes a lot more time to get from intermediate to advanced English.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the difference between learning to walk and then training for a marathon. So while going from B1 to B2 might take you around 180 hours of study, to go from C1 to C2 can take like at least 300 hours.
Wow, that's almost double the time. So we really have to go in with a realistic mindset from the
Yeah,
very beginning.
definitely. It's so important to understand that this part of your language journey is a marathon, not a sprint. But no worries, we're going to unpack exactly what you can do to make that marathon manageable and even fun.
Okay, so knowing that, what are like the most important things to really focus on as we try to get to that advanced fluency?
I think the most important thing is to build a really strong vocabulary. You're looking at knowing like 5,000 to 6,000 words for advanced level. But what's even more important, I think, is understanding how to use those words with nuance and with precision.
So it's not just about memorizing like a huge list of words. What else should we be thinking about?
You're right. It's more about understanding the subtleties. So like using these advanced word combinations, for example, saying a surge of anger instead of just angry paints a much more vivid image for the listener, don't you think?
It definitely does. It adds a lot more depth to the language. Are there other examples like this that we should keep in mind?
Absolutely. Choosing the right synonym is another way to really refine your vocabulary. So for instance, using get the hang of instead of just learn how to makes your speech sound so much more natural and fluent. These little subtle choices can make a really big difference in how your English is perceived.
Yeah, I can see how that level of precision just makes your language so much better. It's those small tweaks that really help you sound more like a native speaker.
And then there's idioms. These are those quirky expressions that just add color and personality to your language.
Mhm.
But to use them correctly, you really need a good understanding of culture and context.
Right. Using an idiom in the wrong situation can be really awkward. Context is definitely key.
100%.
Yeah.
Speaking of vocabulary, have you ever actually tested your vocabulary level? There's this great website called Lexer.com. It gives you a good sense of where you stand. It's fun and pretty insightful for anyone learning a language.
Ooh, that's a good tip. I'm going to check that out later for sure. So besides vocabulary, what other areas should we be focusing on as intermediate learners trying to get to that advanced level?
Reading is another really crucial area to step up. It's time to move on from those simplified texts and dive into more challenging stuff like The Economist, National Geographic, or even The New Yorker.
So we need to embrace those articles that might seem a little bit intimidating at first.
Yeah, exactly. This is where you're going to find those complex sentences, academic vocabulary, and different styles of writing that'll really push your comprehension skills. And if you're getting ready for any English proficiency exams, like the TOEFL, being comfortable with this kind of reading is super important.
Yeah, that makes sense. You need to be ready for anything they throw at you.
Exactly. Now let's talk about listening, a skill that many English learners find really hard.
Oh, yeah. Understanding what people are saying is one thing, but deciphering different accents, understanding sarcasm and those idioms everyone uses can feel like a whole new level of difficulty.
You're so right. It's more than just understanding words. Advanced listening means identifying the important information, recognizing the speaker's intentions, and even predicting what they might say next. You basically become a language detective.
So how do we get better at this detective work? Any tips for improving our listening skills?
Podcasts are amazing. They offer a huge range of topics and speaking styles, so you can always find something that you enjoy. This YouTube expert we're talking about recommends podcasts like Lex Friedman and Andrew Huberman, both known for their really insightful and engaging conversations.
Those are great suggestions, and TV shows are also great for this. Something like Emily in Paris can be super fun and educational at the same time. You get a glimpse into French culture, but also hear some really beautiful idiomatic English.
That's a great point. If you're feeling really ambitious, you could try watching with English subtitles on to help you catch any words or phrases that you miss.
Now that we've covered reading and listening, what about writing? How do we improve our writing to reach that advanced level?
This YouTuber has some really good advice here, too. One of the most important things is to learn organization. Think clear paragraphs, strong introductions and conclusions, and using linking words strategically.
So it's all about having a solid structure to lead the reader through your ideas.
You got it. And as you progress, you'll also need to learn how to integrate information from multiple sources. This is really important for academic writing.
So how can we practice that in a more casual way?
Believe it or not, writing reviews online, like on Yelp, can actually be really good practice.
Mm.
It forces you to organize your thoughts,
Right.
express opinions, and present information clearly and concisely.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. That's a great tip. When it comes to writing, is it more important to be grammatically perfect or to focus on getting your message across?
That's a good question. Grammar is important, of course, but remember, the main goal of writing is to communicate. Don't let the need to be perfect stop you from expressing your ideas. A few small errors won't ruin your writing as long as your message is clear and well-structured.
Especially in situations where you're under pressure, like an exam.
Right. Now, speaking of pressure, let's talk about speaking. This is often the scariest part of learning a new language.
I get that. Even after living in an English-speaking country for years, I still get nervous when I'm talking to native speakers. It can be kind of intimidating.
It's completely normal. But here's the good news. Lots of English-speaking cultures value inclusivity. So while correct grammar is good, people are usually more interested in connecting with you and understanding what you're saying.
So you're saying it's more about what you say than about speaking perfectly?
Yeah. And this leads to a surprising tip from this YouTuber. Practice with AI tools like ChatGPT.
Really? Talking to a chatbot can actually help me improve my speaking.
It might surprise you, but yeah.
Yeah.
AI tools give you a judgment-free space to practice your pronunciation, try out new words, and even have conversations about different topics.
That's interesting. It sounds like a good way to build confidence and fluency without any pressure. Are there other online tools you'd recommend for practicing speaking?
For sure. Websites like speech.com are good for practicing pronunciation. And for practicing spontaneous speaking, you could even try something like improv.com. It's about finding creative ways to push yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, it's just like anything else. The more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you become. Speaking of pushing ourselves, let's dive into the world of advanced grammar.
Remember when we were all struggling to learn all the English tenses? And then we realized native speakers don't always follow the rules?
Oh, yeah. It can be frustrating to learn all the rules and then find out they're not always true.
Well, those times when they break the rules actually show some of the most interesting parts of English. And that's exactly what we're going to explore now. Are you ready to unlock some advanced grammar secrets?
Give me those secrets. I want to know the tricks that make native speakers sound so fluent.
Okay, well, let's start with something called inversion. Basically, you change the usual word order in a sentence to emphasize something. So instead of saying, he not only saved my life, you could say, not only did he save my life, you see how that puts the focus on the action.
Oh, that's cool. It's like you're highlighting that part of the sentence. What are some other advanced grammar tools that we can use?
Another one that can be tricky but really helpful is mixed conditionals. It's basically mixing different tenses together to express those complex hypothetical situations. Might sound complicated, but with some practice, you can really use it to make your English sound more nuanced and interesting.
So how would we use a mixed conditional in a real sentence?
Let's say you wanted to express regret about not studying harder in school. You could say something like, if I had studied harder in school, I would have a better job now. See how you're mixing the past and present to create this hypothetical scenario.
Oh, I see. So it's like saying, if only things were different. But instead of just wishing, we're actually using grammar to express that complex thought.
Exactly. And don't stress if you don't get it right away. This YouTube expert has a whole course that explains these concepts in detail. But let's move on to something a little more fun, spoken grammar.
Spoken grammar. What's that?
Basically, it's all about understanding the shortcuts and things that native speakers leave out in everyday conversations. Think about it. You rarely hear someone say, do you want some coffee? It's more natural to just say, want some coffee.
That's so true. It's almost like a secret code that fluent speakers use to sound more relaxed and natural.
Yeah. You don't necessarily have to speak like this yourself, but it's really helpful to be able to understand it when you hear it. It's part of becoming a more well-rounded speaker.
Right. So by understanding those shortcuts, we can avoid those awkward moments when talking to native speakers in casual situations.
Exactly. And finally, let's touch on something called cleft sentences. These are a little more advanced, but they're great for emphasizing specific information in a sentence.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me an example of how a cleft sentence works.
Imagine someone says, "Did you hear that Sharon's car got broken into?" You might respond with, "No, it was Nina's car that was broken into." See how that structure shifts the emphasis to Nina's car?
Oh, that's clever. It's a subtle way to correct someone without sounding like you're disagreeing with them.
Right, and like you can see, mastering these grammar techniques can really make your English sound more polished and sophisticated. But grammar is just one piece of the puzzle. Let's go back to vocabulary for a minute.
Back to vocabulary. I thought we covered that already.
Well, we talked about having a large vocabulary and using words with nuance. But there's another layer to it, which is understanding how words work together.
Like, what do you mean by that?
I'm talking about collocations.
Yeah.
Basically, words that naturally go together, like heavy rain or make a decision. Using these combinations makes your English sound so much more natural. It's like the difference between wearing a mismatched outfit and a perfectly coordinated one.
So it's not just knowing the words, but knowing how they fit together to make those natural sounding phrases.
You got it. And paying attention to how native speakers actually use language can really help you expand your vocabulary and fluency.
So it's all about observing and absorbing those patterns in real speech. What about idioms? We talked about them a little earlier, but they can be so tricky to learn.
You're right. Idioms can be super confusing. Remember, their meaning isn't always literal, so you really need to understand the cultural context behind them.
Otherwise, you might use them in the wrong situation and end up looking totally lost.
Exactly. But don't let that scare you away from learning and using them. Idioms are a great way to add some personality and color to your English.
It's like adding spices to a dish. A little bit goes a long way.
Perfect analogy. Now let's move on to another really important part of advanced English pronunciation.
Ooh, pronunciation. That's one of the things I struggle with the most. I still feel a little self-conscious about my accent.
It's funny, but almost everyone feels that way at some point. Just remember, everyone has an accent. It's what makes your voice unique.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But what if my accent makes it hard for people to understand me?
I get that. While having perfect pronunciation isn't absolutely necessary for communication, speaking clearly definitely helps. Instead of trying to get rid of your accent completely, just focus on making sure that it's clear and easy to understand.
So it's more about clarity than sounding exactly like a native speaker.
Yeah. And remember those resources we talked about before, speech.com and AI tools like ChatGPT can be really helpful for practicing. But here's another tip. Pay attention to intonation and rhythm.
Intonation and rhythm, what do you mean?
Think about it like music. English has a certain flow with rises and falls in pitch that add meaning and emotion. Copying these patterns can really make your speech sound more natural and engaging.
So it's not just about pronouncing each word correctly, but also about capturing the music of the language.
Exactly. Listen to how native speakers talk. Pay attention to how their voices go up and down and try to do the same thing when you speak.
Maybe we should even try some karaoke in English.
I love that idea. It's such
Yeah.
a fun way to practice and loosen up without feeling too self-conscious.
So let's move on to another crucial skill for advanced English listening comprehension.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. It's not just about hearing the words, but really understanding the nuances, the implied meanings, and the cultural context behind what's being said.
Sounds like we need to become master decoders of the English language.
Right. Think of yourself as a language detective, putting together clues from the speaker's words, their tone of voice, and even their body language.
So how do we train ourselves to become better listeners?
Podcasts, TV shows, and movies are your best friends here. But don't just passively watch or listen, actively engage with the content. Try to predict what will happen next, or summarize the main points.
It's like watching a movie with a friend and talking about it afterwards. It helps you understand everything on a deeper level.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to rewind and listen again if you miss something, especially if there's a word or phrase you don't know.
It's okay to pause and give our brains a little time to catch up. And what about subtitles? Are they helpful or do they just make us lazy?
Subtitles can be a really good tool, especially when you're first starting out with more challenging content. They can help you catch those tricky words and get used to different accents.
They're like training wheels for our ears. They can be especially helpful for figuring out the differences between British and American English.
Speaking of that, don't forget that English is spoken all over the world with lots of different accents and dialects. Don't limit yourself to just one type of English. Try to listen to as many different voices as you can.
It's like expanding your music taste. The more you listen, the more you appreciate all the different sounds.
I like that. Now let's shift gears and talk about writing, which is another super important part of mastering advanced English.
Writing, that's where I feel like I have the most work to do.
Well, you're not alone. Writing takes time and practice, but it's so rewarding once you start to feel confident expressing yourself in writing.
So where do we start?
Remember those tips about organization from the YouTuber? Well, they're even more important for writing. Think of it like building a house. You need a strong foundation, a good structure, and all those finishing touches that make it look great.
So clear paragraphs, strong introductions and conclusions, and those linking words are all important for making our writing flow and sound good.
You got it. And just like building a house, writing takes a few drafts and revisions to get it right.
It's a process, not a one-time thing. Are there any tools or resources you recommend for improving writing?
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to use a grammar checker, a thesaurus, or even ask a friend to read your work and give you feedback. But one of the best things you can do is just read, read, read.
So, by reading the work of other writers, we can learn from them and develop our own style.
Exactly. It's like learning to cook by watching a chef. You see how they do things, their attention to detail, their creativity, and you start to add those things to your own cooking.
And like cooking writing involves experimenting and finding what works best for you.
For sure. So play with language, try different styles, and don't be afraid to let your personality shine through in your writing.
But at the end of the day, the most important thing is to communicate our ideas clearly and effectively.
Absolutely. Now, before we finish up this section, let's take a minute to think about our goals. What are you hoping to achieve by becoming really fluent in English?
That's a great question. It's different for everyone, I think. Some people want to get ahead in their careers, some want to travel the world with confidence, and some just like the challenge of learning something new.
Whatever your reasons,
Right.
remember that language learning is a journey, not a destination. There's always something new to learn, something new to explore, and new ways to express yourself.
And as we continue on this journey, let's celebrate those small wins, those little moments of progress, and never stop trying to be the best communicators we can be.
I love that. And remember, this deep dive is just the start. There are tons of resources out there to help you, like this YouTube experts channel, online courses, even finding a language partner, or just talking to native speakers whenever you can.
Yeah, it's all about those opportunities to practice and learn and grow. And it's important to remember that learning a language is like a lifelong adventure, full of surprises and challenges and ways to grow as a person. But speaking of challenges, one thing that can be tough is figuring out how much progress we're actually making. How do we know we're really getting closer to that advanced level of fluency?
That's a really good question. It's easy to get so focused on grammar and vocabulary that we forget about the big picture. One way to track your progress is to use those standardized tests, like the TOEFL or IELTS.
So those tests can give us a more objective idea of where our skills are at.
Exactly. They give you a structured way to see how well you can read, write, listen, and speak, so you get a clearer picture of your overall level. Even if you don't plan on taking one of those official exams, there are a lot of online quizzes and tools that can help you figure out your strengths and weaknesses.
It's like taking your language temperature to see where you might need a little extra care.
I like that. And don't forget about getting feedback from others. Whether it's a language partner, a tutor, or a friend who's a native speaker, they can give you some really valuable insights into how you're doing and where you can improve.
It's like having a personal trainer for your English. They can help you spot those little habits you might not even notice and show you how to get better.
Right. But besides those external measures, pay attention to how you feel about your progress. Are you finding it easier to understand movies and TV shows? Can you express yourself more fluently and confidently when you speak? Are you having those moments where a grammar rule finally makes sense?
Oh, those aha moments are the best. They make all the hard work worth it.
They really do. So celebrate those wins no matter how small. Every step forward, every new word you learn, every conversation you have is a sign of how dedicated and passionate you are about this amazing language.
And remember, this whole language learning thing is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be times when you feel like you're flying and times when you feel stuck. The important thing is to keep practicing, stay focused on your goals, and never give up on becoming fluent.
So well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Yeah.
Remember that language is more than just rules and words. It's a powerful tool for connecting with people, for expressing yourself, for discovering new cultures and ideas, and for broadening your horizons in ways you never thought possible.
So enjoy the journey, embrace the challenges, and never stop exploring the amazing world of English. Who knows what incredible adventures await you on the other side of fluency?
Until next time, happy learning.